Application of the study. Appropriate water quality assessment and health management measures need reliable quantitative information. However, these remain a problem, especially for developing countries, as the traditional methods for collecting water samples, testing and analysis in water laboratories are not only costly, but also lack capability for real-time data capture, analysis, and the fast dissemination of information to relevant stakeholders for making timely and informed decisions. Considering these drawbacks, a challenge in developing countries is how to develop better methodologies to increase the ability of water resource researchers and decision makers to obtain data abundantly, accurately, and quickly compared to the traditional methods through which it is difficult for some water resources to obtain accurate data. GIS has emerged as a significant platform for resource management studies and in different fields of science. To this end, using GIS to assess groundwater quality becomes essential. Methodology, description of the study area. Nakuru municipality boundary lies at latitude 0 degrees 15 minutes and 30 seconds and 0 degrees 30 minutes and 15 seconds south, and the longitude of 36 degrees and 0 minutes and 36 degrees 10 minutes and 0 seconds east. The total coverage area of the municipality is about 300 kilometers. The current water supply by the company, that is Nawasco, stands at 40,000 meter cubed per day against the water demand of 7,000 meters per day. The population was estimated as per 2019 census to be 507,674. The geology is a rocky structure made up of tertiary volcanic rocks. The hydrology is dependent on the catchment supplied through rivers and service and some service recharge. Temperatures range at 10 degrees, that is July to August, and the highest is 20 degrees from January to March, where the mean annual evaporation is 2,185 millimeters, mean annual rainfall 960 millimeters, and the area has usually two rain seasons, the long rains and the short rains and dry season. Research design and data collection methods. The study adopted a quantitative research with a component of field geospatial and a cross-sectional survey, systematic sampling method, laboratory statistical and GIS techniques. Selection of sampling points. Criteria of selected sampling points was based on drinking water supply intakes for Nakuru municipality, that is some boreholes located in a well field that we call Olbanita. The municipalities examined drinking water supplies were from 6 boreholes that make up that specific well field, and they are located in the lower Baringo Basin in a sub-basin area of 6.25 kilometers. And the database that was used for this study was both spatial and attribute data. The spatial based on GIS collection and the analytical data from the lab analysis. Location of sampling points. Precise coordinates and elevations of all sampling points were taken using global position system, and the data was processed using ArcView 10.1 software. To develop a map or a route path showing the location of the sampling points, that is the location of the boreholes. There are 6 in number, where we have BB9 and BB10. Those are kind of where all the 6 boreholes collect water, and then from that collection point, it is chlorinated before it is it is kind of directed to the water supply system of Nakuru municipality. Sample collection methods and the water quality data sets. Using standard methods as applied in groundwater sampling, water samples were collected manually on monthly basis for groundwater from June 2014 to March 2015. Sampling period represented 3 hydrological seasons, that is transition, short rain, and then dry period. Systematic sampling technique was employed through the sampling process. Samples were placed in 1 liter polythene acid washed bottles, then water cleaned and pre-rinsed with distilled water and kept at constant temperature of 4 degrees C for laboratory investigations. The data sets that were generated from the sampling for the 10 months is 3 groups of water quality data sets covering the transition period, covering the dry period and the short period. And each data set consisted of 6 selected water quality parameters, that is pH, electrical conductivity, chloride, cadmium, selenium, and fluoride. Water sample analysis, 2 parameters, that is pH and electrical conductivity analysis, was on site or in the field. And for lab analysis is the 4 parameters, chloride, fluoride, cadmium, and selenium. Geospatial assessment on groundwater quality parameters. After the data with the GIS collection and the laboratory data, they contributed to 2 data sets, that is the spatial data and then the analytical data, and they were integrated with GIS software to develop spatial distribution maps for the groundwater quality of observed parameters as applied in other studies. Data analysis. 2 methods were used for the analytical data. Descriptive statistical analysis was used to describe the examined parameters in terms of mean, average, standard deviation, and all that, where the averages or their total concentration was kind of compared to the WHO 2011 and NEMA standards for drinking water to see if they are within the required standards. Then for the spatial data, for the analysis of the spatial data, GIS techniques were used. Results for objective 1, statistical summary of the analytical results of tested parameters considering the mean values of all the sampled points per sampling period indicated low concentration in chloride and pH as compared to the maximum recommended values for WHO 2011 and NEMA 2006 for drinking water. But elevated levels were noted mainly in electrical conductivity, selenium, fluoride, and cadmium for each sampling period for each sampling point across the 3 sampling periods. Overall results show high levels of selenium, fluoride, cadmium as compared to other parameters in all the boreholes across the sampling fields. Results continuation for objective 2. Created spatial maps through the GIS analysis gave a visual representation of directional spread and trends in terms of average concentration for each observed parameter across the sampled points over the sampling period. The spread was evaluated based on distribution of colors as depicted in the maps. For example, the map that is immediately, when I talk of the spread of the colors, is that there was color contrast. Then there were ranges that were meant in reference to the required standards. If a parameter is within the required standards, it was given a faint color. If it was away about 25 less than the required standards, it was given the mint bright color, and then if it was away from the required standards in the lower side, it was given the darkest color. So now back to that slide. Yes, objective 2. The spread was evaluated based on the distribution of colors as depicted in the maps. Color contrast along the path of spread represented the concentration values of the measured parameters. In the maps, light colors signify locations of low values, that is excellent water, that is less than 25% violation to set standards. Then light colors signify locations of average values, that is good water quality. That is the standard away from the required. What is required? It is at less than 50%. Then the darkest colors signify locations of high values. Those are poor water quality, where the violation is more than 50% of the required standards. Evaluation of the colors distribution patterns in terms of water quality standards was based on the parameters, that is the high, the low, and the average. So now that is one of the parameters, that is the selenium. When you check the finger, the boreholes are located according to their geographical locations in that sampling, in that well field. For example, there is BB3, BB5, and BB7, where the dark colors represent concentrations that add more than 50% violations to the required standards. Then the average, or the color following it in terms of contrast represent less than 50%, and then the light ones just represent less than 25% violation to the required standards. So that was for selenium, the spread across all the sampled boreholes. How was concentration of that specific variable vary from borehole 1, borehole 2, borehole 3 as we go across. So the other parameter was fluoride. The same spread was represented in that manner for its visualization and representation. Then also for electrical conductivity, for cadmium, and also for chloride. So the other one was for pH. Discussion of results. Objective number 1. Chemical quality of groundwater is an important attribute which controls water use. The results show that the waters from urbanita boreholes are slightly to moderately alkaline in nature, fresh in nature of pH and chloride, but contaminated with respect to fluoride, selenium, electrical conductivity, and cadmium. These can be related to geological factors and anthropogenic activities that prevail in the area. The results of the present study are in conformity with the previous studies' findings concerning interaction of surface water and groundwater with anthropogenic and geological factors of the larger Nakuru Basin, where the authors reported the area's soils and the waters to be highly mineralized and alkaline in nature. Similar influencing factors have also been confirmed in groundwater or in related studies on water quality evaluation in other regions. Discussion of result continuation for objective number 2. Groundwater maps in regard to water quality are important in evaluation of water to ascertain its suitability against various uses. Analysis results of maps confirm existence of spatial patterns for all water parameters across different sampling size over the sampling period. The spread of the examined water quality parameters of all the sampled sites indicated that some variables That is selenium, cadmium, electrical conductivity, and the fluoride exhibited a problem in quality when evaluated to guideline values for drinking water. Other parameters such as chloride, pH, however, did not present any problems at all the sampling points over the entire study period. Conclusion. The study has demonstrated that integration of GIS and analytical techniques can provide an effective and a reliable approach for monitoring groundwater resources for drinking water uses in order to provide solutions to the limitations associated with the traditional methods. The study concludes that groundwater from Olbanita pores is slightly alkaline and considerably ionized, creating a chemical water quality problem. Spatial concentration patterns exist for observed water quality parameters across all the boreholes. The findings can serve as a resource information database and a tool for quality control and sustainable management of drinking water resources of the area. Then, finally, the performance of the methods applied in this study can also guide the innovation of other modern methods to overcome the limitation linked to the conventional methods for effective water quality management of the study area or regions in similar geographical regions. Recommendations. Appropriate treatment of water from the monitor sites before its utilization for drinking purposes is required. Assessment and potential risks to human health associated with drinking water resources of the area is also recommended. And in future, there is need for broader applications for these methodologies in the context of generating a robust and accurate database on status of drinking water resources of the study area. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
A clap for the presentation. A very current presentation on what we always take for granted, drinking water. We want to request the participants to note their comments and their concerns from the presentation so that we get another presentation. Then we are able to interrogate the same presentations. Thank you so much. We want to get another presentation again. Just get ready. Something on biogas, which is another live concern in matters environmental conservation and alternative sources of energy. After that presentation, we shall have a presentation by Dr. Peter Kirui. And then we can have an interlude by focusing on those three presentations. We are also getting ready for the parallel session in the other side. No sooner will Dr. Orao and Chearia come here, then we shall be able to break. Apart from him and Dr. Kirui, who else are also presenting? I think I've seen Dr. Nelima with a presentation. I've seen two other presentations again. Three. Yes, we qualify to break into parallel rooms, but after, I think, the next two presentations.
My name is David Masara, and I'm presenting on behalf of my team, which comprises of Engineer Swale and Fantas Wanyaki. And our project is titled Design and Development of a Biogas Cleaning Unit. Okay.
Yeah, there's a concern that the live streaming is being interfered by the external light. But go ahead.
Okay, the title of this presentation is Design and Okay, sorry for that. So the title of this presentation is Design and Development of a Biogas Cleaning Unit. And it's a project that was done in University of Eldoret, the mechanical engineering workshop. So right now, the world has faced significant problems which arise by the over-reliance on fossil fuels, and then biogas has been deemed as the best alternative to substitute these fossil fuels so that we try to eliminate the emission of greenhouse gases. So biogas comprises of carbon dioxide and methane as the primary components. And if you look at this biogas, carbon dioxide is an inert gas which does not help us in any combustion. And it's the one which comprises of the biggest percentage, and due to this, there is need to try to reduce the carbon dioxide concentration so that we may have only methane, which is the only gas that is used in combustion, or the useful gas in this biogas. Similarly, we have hydrogen sulfide gas, which will hinder the application of biogas because it brings corrosion in the metallic components used. So, looking at this slide, from the first part we can see the versatility of biogas, whereby we say it's an excellent choice for use in applications like heating, generation of electricity, and cooking. So there are several methods in place from literature that are employed to purify the raw biogas, and all of these ones have their advantages and drawbacks. So in this research, we are trying to include the use of advanced instrumentation, which include but not limited to sensors, to try and see the efficacy of the purification process used in this research. So the existing methods from literature include membrane separation, gas scrubbing, chemical reaction separation, and cryogenic separations. But in this research, gas scrubbing was chosen due to the availability of these scrubbers and the cost involved. So the problem statement, the numerous studies that are in place, they have demonstrated effective purification methods in controlled laboratory settings, and transition to larger biogas plants represent a very big challenge. So this work is trying to address the scalability of biogas purification, which is pivotal for its widespread adoption and sustainable energy source. So to facilitate the scalability, we are going to integrate advanced instrumentation techniques, which, as we have already said, are include but not limited to sensors. So the method that was used in this is highlighted in a table that I'm going to present in the next slide. And the main goal of this is to create a cleaner and more usable form of biogas. So we have a figure. This is the design of the biogas cleaning unit, which starts from carbon oxide, methane, and hydrogen sulfide. Then we have prescribing concentration analysis. This one, we are going to pass the raw biogas through the sensors to try and establish a baseline for analysis. Then we are going to scrub CO2 first by bubbling it through water. So we are going to exploit solubility of this carbon oxide. Then we have post-scrubbing of concentration analysis, where we are going to try and test the concentration of CO2 and see if we have achieved the target. The next part is going to try to scrub hydrogen sulfide by passing it through iron 2 oxide so that it's going to be trapped. We are going to exploit its capability to react with iron 2 sulfide. So the other one is post-scrubbing of hydrogen sulfide so that we try to see if the concentration levels have reduced according to the design. So we have the other one, we are trying to check methane. So we have a series of sensors, as we had said, we are going to check the concentration of methane. So data logging, that's the last one, according to this setup, whereby we are going to obtain the data from each sensor and see the concentration levels for each gas. So the last one is the experimental setup that we have just seen. And lastly, we are going to do environmental considerations and safety precautions. So the results from this research, which we did a systematic analysis of all the concentration of gases, we got various results from week 1 to week 4, whereby we add 2 stations. Station 1 is before scrubbing and station 2 was after scrubbing. So by running this raw biogas through the scrubbers that we have said, which include water and iron 2 oxide, then we were able to achieve various concentration or changes in concentration levels. So this was the week 1, we had week 1 data. This is the week 1 data, whereby we see all the gases trying to maybe reduce, whereas the concentration of methane remains high, as we have in the second figure after scrubbing. So the same with week 2, week 3, and week 4 data showed that the concentration of carbon oxide and hydrogen sulfide reduced significantly. And the concentration of methane is the highest at the end of this week 4 scrubbing. So the discussion. So before scrubbing, there was a very high concentration of carbon oxide, as it was observed in the carbon oxide sensor, which was up to 6,000 parts per million of gas, and low concentration of methane was recorded from 4 to 160 parts per million, and the concentration of hydrogen sulfide was 0.2 to 4 parts per million. After scrubbing, there was a reduced concentration of carbon oxide, which was 100 to 300 parts per million from the high 6,000 parts per million. Methane gas ranged from 4 parts per million to 9 parts per million, which was an increase. And hydrogen sulfide reduced to 0.01 to 0.04 parts per million from 0.2 to 4 parts per million. And in conclusion, this study was able to achieve the cleaning or purification of biogas, and by so doing, the bulkiness was reduced and the corrosion nature was able to be reduced significantly. Thank you.
A clap to this future engineer and others. Thank you so much for a presentation on what goes on in our daily lives concerning biogas. I'm sure if you are delved into matters significance, you'll be telling us about environmental friendliness, the issue of getting alternative sources of energy, cooking energy, among others. Thank you. You will have time to interact with these participants when the time for reactions come. I want us to listen to a very current presentation on coups in Africa, presented by none other than Dr. Peter Kirui, alongside Dr. Wanyonyi. Let's follow the presentation, and then we get now time to listen, to respond to those two presentations, and then we go into the second phase. Dr. may it please you to make your presentation. How many other presenters are in the room? For purposes of planning for this, we should be having another around 5. Yes, they're about 5. Then we also have online presenters wishing to make presentation. We are making a provision for them. We want to recognize the presence of the Dean, School of Arts and Human Resource Development, who the better part of yesterday, from the minute 1 to the last minute, Dr. stayed with us. It is very humbling. Thank you, Dean. Doc, take it away.
Thank you. Yes, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Peter Kirui, and I'll be presenting this paper that we worked with my colleague, Dr. Helen Wanyonyi. As rightly said, this is a fairly emerging topic. I'm calling it Emerging Coups in Former French West Africa and the Challenge of African Democracy in the 21st Century. Now, I know that you are all aware of what has been happening, especially in the past, 2-3 years. There is a wave of coups in former French colonies. France has about 14 colonies in Africa. What you see that is painted, is it purple? Is that purple? I hope so. I hope it's purple. Yes, and of course, France has had, just like other former colonies, European colonies in Africa. Although African countries have gotten independence, of course, there is the issue of neocolonialism, but this is very much pronounced, especially in French West Africa, where France has maintained a very tight grip and control in its former colonies. And this has led to a lot of tension that is facing shocks, especially from the past few years. We shall be seeing how that develops. Now, just to help paint a picture of what is happening between France and former French West Africa, there is a policy that France adopted regarding the relationship between France and its colonies. Is called Francafrique. Now, Francafrique is supposed to have been a special relationship to show the closeness between France and former French colonies, where they were using a policy like assimilation, for example, during the colonial period. Of course, after independence, they kind of changed that policy to what they are calling Francafrique. And I'm sure you are seeing that. That picture speaks about exploitation, but we're going to see how that develops. Now, that's my abstract, and I'm not going to read through that. But generally, we were trying to answer we had 3 objectives. One was to interrogate the implication of Francafrique to former French colonies in Africa. 2 was to trace the militarization of politics in former French West Africa. And the third objective was to situate the military takeovers in former French West Africa to the dynamic, prospective, multipolar world politics. Now, as you take time to go through that abstract briefly maybe, I'll try to explain context. I have very few slides, by the way, so I'll be very brief. One of the aims of this particular paper, was motivated because of the dynamics of what is happening currently in former French West Africa. But the presence of France military in Africa is not a new development. Actually, France has military bases across many of its former, colonies. And the presence of the military in France just tells you part of the way France looks at military as an extension of its politics. In other words, having a tight control of the leadership and using the military, of course, to achieve that particular objective. Now, there is what they are calling Francafrique. If you look at the keywords, the first there is Francafrique. Now, this word, Francafrique, was used by the first president of Ivory Coast in 1955. Now, at the time, he was referring to a very close relationship between Ivory Coast and France, which at that time he termed as amicable, he termed as a good relationship. Of course, with the course of time, many countries in former French West Africa are going to realize that that is not the case, and they have actually been exploited all along. Now, what is the research problem? While most African countries became independent from European colonialism about 6 decades ago, they ideally gained sovereignty and they are expected to be independent. However, we all know that colonial legacies continue to linger even today. And for the case of former French West African colonies, they adopted a policy known as Francafrique, which we are going to look into the details of what that policy entails. But generally speaking, the research problem is, yes, former French colonies, just like many other African countries, are independent, but they got what we could say uhuru wa bendera, not really independence, so to speak, especially politically, especially economically, and even militarily. What is the theoretical framework? This work was informed by the post-colonial theory, and it highlights the impact of colonial and imperial histories that still have in shaping colonial way of thinking, and generally which have marginalized non-Western world. Now, this theory also sees capitalism as an extension of colonialism, and it is actually concerned with the disparities in the global power and wealth accumulation, and why some states and groups exercise so much power over others. Now, this is a photo that I took a while back in a colonial museum in Brussels. Now, this, just to bring the idea of colonialism in our mind, these were the chains that were used by by Belgians in Belgian Congo. So this is what was being used during to chain Africans and so on. To just have a picture of what colonial exploitation is, again, I took this photo there. This is forests in Congo, and the way Belgians, have been exploiting that, especially to pick trees which have been used to build the metropole. This is just an aspect of colonial exploitation. The methodology, this was a qualitative research, and it is an ongoing research, by the way, where literature was systematically collected from Google Scholar. We've been looking at reviewing literature from the time most African countries got independence in the early 60s. And we've been selecting them, seeing the changes in terms of, especially the development of Francafrique, which is a policy that I'll be explaining in further detail. The keywords were used to search. Now, to ensure that you get the historical perspective of the existing literature and the contemporary perspective, like I said, we were selecting the years in terms of, we look at literature, say, from 2010 to 2020, from 2020 moving forward, and then from 2010 maybe to 1990 or after the Cold War, after the Second World War, and then after the Cold War and after colonialism, just to see how that concept is developing. Now, and again, data was reviewed chronologically, and the data was then analyzed thematically. For qualitative research, of course, we do not have an hypothesis, and we are not trying to generalize any findings here. Well, what are the findings when you look at that? Now, Franco-Africa has perpetuated neocolonialism in former French West Africa. That is the finding. In other words, the policy that was supposed to be a close relationship between France and former colonies is actually exploitative. Now, the term Franco-Afrique, like I mentioned, was first used by Felix Boigny in 1955 in reference to Ivory Coast, which at the time he was referring to that relationship as a good relationship. Now, again, one of the things that France has been very successful in doing is ensuring that they are able to prop up African leaders and protect them in power, as long as they are serving the interest of the metropole. So in other words, part of the reasons why we've had military presence in many West African countries, former French West African countries, in most cases it is actually to entrench the interest of France. And they can do this by ensuring that whoever is there is actually protecting their interest. And if you are not protecting their interest, you are going to find yourself in trouble. And of course, there is a lot of evidence to that. Many African leaders who are ostensibly civilian leaders, and even perhaps elected democratically, but actually serving the interest of the metropole. The term Franco-Afrique, for example, okay, that is according to BOFCON 2013. Now, as time went by, however, anti-French sentiments became louder, especially with the publication of L'Afrique in 1998, where he described Franco-Afrique as nothing but the longest scandal in the Republic. Now, there was a very big, or a very classical book, so to speak, which kind of changed and challenged the idea of Franco-Afrique, published in 1998. Where that book generally talks about Franco-Afrique as being the longest scandal in former French West Africa. How does that develop? Now, this is a screenshot of BBC News on 6th of August this year. This is after the coup in Niger. Now, the question there is France to blame for the instability in West Africa? That is BBC on 6th of August. A few weeks later, I think these are the military coup leaders responding. France takes us for idiots inside coup hit Niger. Now, in this study, we were looking at not just Niger, we looked at Mali, we looked at Chad, we looked at Niger, and we looked at Gabon. But for purposes of demonstration, and of course for purposes of, for purposes of demonstration and, oops, what's happening? Sorry for that. Well, as we wait for that to come back, thank you. I think from there I can proceed. Thank you. Yeah, we were there. So I was saying that for purposes of this presentation, I just picked on Niger, partly because it is one of the recent coups. Of course, I know Gabon came lately, but there's the dynamics to Gabon, and that's why we purposely picked on this for demonstration purposes. Now, one of the things, just to illustrate what neocolonialism actually means for former French West African colonies. Now, when they got independence, France actually refused those countries to have their own currency. So they ended up developing a currency that they call franc for French colonies in Africa, what they call CFA. Now, France itself is responsible for the value of that currency. Leave alone that, many of the central, West African countries actually don't have central banks, so to speak. In other words, their reserves are still actually based in Paris. And the value of their currency, of course, ensures that France is going to have preferential trade agreements compared to the countries they are trading with. Now, CFA franc made former French colonies subservient to the French monetary system, where exchange rates were determined at the French metropole in what could be termed as, by Agbo, as monetary Nazism. Now, there's a scholar known as Agbo, who, according to him, the idea of CFA franc is actually amounting to monetary Nazism, Monetary Nazism is, is the system that the Nazis used during during the Nazi Germany, where they dictated actually the currency to be used after they had occupied the territories. So in other words, Akbo relates this, what France is doing in former French West Africa, and he terms it as monetary Nazism. Now, the decision by Mali, for example, Mali was one of the countries that we looked at, to negotiate with terrorism at the Chagrin of France has partly contributed to anti-French sentiments, which progressively gained pace, implicating the French legionnaires. That is Amoa 2023. Now, of course, in the larger Sahel, if we go back to the map, just around the Sahara, we've had the cases of Islamic terrorism there. Now, because of that problem, Mali as a government decided to kind of negotiate with the terrorists as part of, peace agreement. Of course, France did not like that. Again, and I don't want to deviate from this. Sometimes the war on terrorism is actually not the war on terrorism, so to speak. The war on terror picked up after 9/11 in the US. So generally, the war on terrorism is part of US military. Of course, after the 9/11, they are going to start that campaign. And sometimes there is a lot that goes on into that, because conflicts in a particular region doesn't necessarily mean that those people cannot actually have an agreement in terms of the political system to have. And a very good example is DRC Congo. One of the reasons why DR Congo is not peaceful and our military is there, we have around 1,000 KDF, part of the East African force that is there. Among other countries, we've had a UN force, peacekeeping force in DRC for a long time, and so on and so forth. But we also do know that it is not that the Congolese people cannot really, have their own government. It's about conflict minerals. And the fact that Congo has a lot of minerals which are very useful, especially in the tech industry. Tin, tantalum, and the others. If you are not aware of that, just read about conflict minerals. Our laptops, our tablets, and anything that you can call electronic has a lot of those things. And part of the ways that the metropole does to access those minerals is to ensure that the place is not maybe peaceful. Of course, there is a dynamic to that, but just to emphasize that conflict and so on doesn't necessarily have to be really to bring about peace. Sometimes it is just an extension of, exploitation. Now, according to Amoa 2023, again, the inability of the African peace and security architecture to intervene when required has promoted the use of private military companies such as the Wagner in Central African Republic. Now, we have an African peace and security architecture, which is part of the AU peace architecture, but at the moment we are not very much capable. We do not have the capacity to actually be able to intervene when required. The AU, for example, or some of these regional blocks like ECOWAS, maybe SADC, maybe even East African Community and the rest, sometimes they still even have funding from EU and other international donors and so on. So it's kind of that interrupts their independence, especially in terms of intervening. For the case of Niger, for example, we all know that after the coup, ECOWAS came out and wanted to, to intervene militarily. But, that was actually, the Western hegemony trying to use ECOWAS to continue the French policy in Niger. Luckily, that was not to be the case, and we are happy that at least ECOWAS was not able to be used, to interfere or to try and bring what was supposed to be a civilian rule back to power in Niger, just a few weeks ago. Well, as I come towards the end, we have another picture there. Questions are arising whether we are now moving from Francafrique to Rusafrique. We all know that Russia and China are always going to be on the same block, while the US, UK, and France are going to be in the same block. Now, for those who do not have a background in maybe history or in political science, I've just mentioned the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. So we have US, France, and UK as permanent members who have veto power, and who normally actually decide on anything, peace and security, before we deploy, whether we are talking about even our police to Haiti, that's going to be a UN mandate. It has to go through the UN. Of course, as usual, as part of the geopolitical dynamics, global politics, which are beyond this paper, China and France are always going to be against that. But you will see France, UK, and US, of course, together with other non-permanent members like Kenya, always on one, voting on one part. Now, that is a cartoon there. Of course, that's a cartoon of, Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, people are saying that it looks like because the people of West Africa are trying to shake away France's influence, especially what I was calling Francafrique. People think that Russia is now coming in strongly to kind of have an influence again over the same former French West African, colonies. That's why it's seen that he's trying to paint part of the African continent, especially the former French West Africa, with the Russian flag. Of course, that is a development that we are seeing, but that's something to be seen. As I come towards the end, France has maintained a military presence, like I said, in Niger, Chad, Central African Republic, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and all those countries. And the assumption that Western hegemony had emerged a winner after the Second World War led to the bastardization of African countries in matters international relations, and has continued the glorification of Western European capitalist and liberal views as shaping and determining humanity. Now, after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, of course, we know that capitalism and the US emerged as a hegemon. In other words, as a superpower, so to speak. Of course, when the USSR disintegrated, this is what became, the order of the day. Yeah, for example, in the case of Kenya, we adopted multi-party democracy in the early 90s. It is not, of course, we had our own dynamics. We had the church, we had the civil society and so on pushing for that. But apart from that, there were actually global forces. And it was actually the collapse of the Cold War that led us to actually adopt multi-party democracy in the early 90s. Why? When USSR collapsed, USA remains. And because USA stands for democracy, they tell everybody you have to toe the line. That explains why if it is Kenya, Zambia, Togo, all of us had to change to multi-party democracy. Of course, that was also partly contributed by the local dynamics. Now, because of that, this has rendered theories like imperialism, dependency, and even development and others that were once sought to explore political and institutional contexts in the late modern inequalities between states and national classes. It has rendered them irrelevant. In other words, because of that, when you want to talk about theories like post-colonialism, theories like dependency theory, where you are trying to argue that the issue of development, whether you are looking at it economically, politically, or socially, is like a two-sided coin. And the fact that the West has already taken a position means that if I am rich, you have to be poor. Whether we are talking about the monetary system, the political system, and so on and so forth, which of course are beyond this paper, and we don't have time to get into that. In conclusion, former French colonies might seize the moment to detach from French colonialism and reform their relationship. In other words, Francafrique is now overtaken by time. I'm sure you are aware that the French is now pulling a lot of its military now outside former French colonies because they have realized it is no longer tenable. Now, military rule, however, must be transitory and usher in popular civilian rule. Perhaps after an election, that is a question we are likely to observe. Now, one of the things that you are noticing about the recent military coups in former French West Africa is that it was getting a lot of civilian support. Of course, that is very unusual in the Western liberal model because militaries are supposed to be in the barracks. They are not supposed to be seizing power. But in this case, we are questioning the whole aspect of democracy because, especially in former French West Africa, because it appears that even the aspect of civilian rule was being infiltrated again, especially by the French system, and that system was not actually serving the people of West Africa. Now, because Africa is rising, African states should therefore seek better deals with the North and other partners. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
A clap for this great team. Asante sana, Doc. We have had 3 presentations, and yes, Chair. Those who may feel like presenting online, kindly get, and the area, kindly get in touch with our chair so that arrangements are made for online presentations. And in the interest of time, we are all working between now and 1, so that at 2 we have a keynote presentation by Reverend Ruben Kigame. That will be done in this hall. But for the online presentations, we want to make a provision for them. After about of reactions, we shall be giving direction about the second venue, so that we save on time, because all these presentations have to come to an end before 1. Now, back to the 3 presentations we have had. We want to allow 2 reactions per presentation for now. Then we can see whether we can take another bout of reactions, or we can move on to the next phase of presentations. We had the first presenter, where is this great lady who talked about drinking water in Nakuru, so that, yes, some reactions will come, and take note so that you will come and clarify. We had a presentation on biogas. Where is this engineer? Yes, he is there. Then Doc Kirui is here for something on course in West Africa. So the first presentation, a concern. Take the mic, my boss. Oh, it is there. Thank you. A concern on drinking water. That, yes, and I knew that Prof. Gohole would have something on drinking water. So I'm very concerned environmentalist. Prof, go on.
I'll request that I ask all the questions that I have. It's just concerns.
Go on.
Yeah, so to all of them, starting with the water one, I would like Dr. Kelly to tell us. I saw the results and the conclusions, and they were very academic, but I want to make it more social. So what do these results mean to the common mwananchi in Nakuru who is drinking this water, after they've known those or whatever information that you got? Then my next question is to Masara. I was a bit concerned when I look at the concentrations of methane in the biogas, because that's the main gas that burns, and used as an energy source. So I'm just wondering, why is it so low on carbon dioxide? Even after the scrubbing, still you find that the carbon dioxide levels are high, and methane, which is of interest, is very low. Then to Dr. Kirui, I'm seeing that African nations, especially West African nations, are shaking off France, but sort of embracing Russia and China. And to me, that might be jumping from the frying pan into the fire. So what difference is there between them being Franco, and then now they're becoming Russia, China? Those are my questions to the different.
Thank you, Prof. Another bout of reactions. Dean, the pass over to Dean. Oh, you have a reaction. Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't listen to the first presentation, but I want to ask a question on biogas. And I want to say that biogas is one of the energy sources that has been embraced over a long period of time. It's a common, if you went to homes with the cows, let me call them cows, it's actually, many homes have embraced that kind of energy. But my question is that in the homes, I don't see the scrubbing processes. I wanted the presenter maybe to bring it down to the domestic kind of use that is happening back down at home. And it would be more educative if this paper included something to do with the dangers CO2 and hydrogen sulfide pose to cooking in the kitchens back there at home? Because these gases, after combustion, they may be causing some dangers to the users at home, and that is it. And then to the next presentation by Dr. Peter Kirui, I think I'm very well educated about the Franco-Afrique relationship, but I was now wondering how does it apply to us back here at home in Kenya? What is it? Thank you.
Asante. Ukiona kichwa cha mwenzako kinanyolewa, I'm sure Dr. Kirui will begin there. Doc.
Thank you. Second presentation, biogas. It was really interesting, especially the cleaning aspect to make it more environmental friendly. Now, what I didn't hear is, I know there are quite a number of sources that are used to generate the biogas. I would have wished to hear some of the sources that are more contaminated than the others. And if there are others that are a bit more clean, that would be used without requiring cleaning or just slight cleaning, I would want to know. Then to the third presenter, we've heard about the Franco-Afrique policy, and what I'm wondering, there are these other ones that were, these other countries that were ruled by the Britain and other countries. How do their policy compare to this one of Francophone? Because we are aware AU is there, and these are African countries. Why has it taken that long to realize that this policy is not working for them? Thank you.
Thank you. Two last ones. We have Doc and then Doc again. Okay, three. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm Dr. Kiplagat Ayebe from Department of Chemistry. Now, my first question goes to that lady who presented on selenium. And my question is, let me appreciate her first by coming up with this approach of using GIS to detect some of the elements. Now, maybe you can just highlight or tell us the principle that this GIS used to detect selenium or fluorides, because I could not get that one clearly compared to analytical techniques that we use. Now, the second question goes to the guy who presented on biogas, and my concern is methane and CO2. You say they are constituents of the biogas, and equally, the products also that you get from there, all of them are greenhouse gases. And these are the contributors to issue of global warming, because greenhouse gases actually absorb heat and then irradiate at night, contributing to global warming. So maybe tell us how different is biogas from other sources of fuel. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a reaction just next to you. Go ahead, my boss.
Thank you. My name is Muga Moses. I have a question to Dr. Kirui. One question on the dynamics of change. With respect to, is it a way forward to attain an African currency? Now that the West Africans are using Franco-Afrique, and as we are using shilling, and Dr. William Samoei Ruto in France, Paris, he came up with an idea to the World Bank and to the United States. How about if we come up with a modern, convenient currency that does not affect our businesses of trade? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lolele, and then Dr. Kamara will wrap it up so that we go for the reactions. So the responses.
Yeah, mine goes to Dr. Kirui. You have clearly stated in your paper reasons for coups in Africa, and one being the motive of former colonies. And this is where your paper on emerging coups in French West Africa, of course, the problem of Francophone, but you also need to think in the reverse on Anglophone. And you seem to say that, you know, where liberation is required, military intervention has become a remedy, because our civil leaders, civil rulers also failed Africa in corruption. So where we think the liberation may be a driving motive where this coup is necessary. And you are saying that military rule must be transitory and usher in popular civilian rule, hopefully after election. I think we may justify also this military intervention where we feel that our civil rule or civilian rules has really failed us in many ways. So I don't justify, but it seems this has become a way to transit from suffering, maybe to a better way of life in Africa. But democracy is the only way in which we can remove bad leaders through election. But you need also to reflect on Anglophone. Anglophone countries are also giving us problems in Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Kamara.
Thank you. We've had very beautiful presentations. And we say in research, when we listen to these presentations and when we engage in scientific discourse, we say this information must trickle down to the village, to the consumers of the biogas, to the consumers of the water. If I were to go to the village now, we're using this information, what would I tell them? What are the red signs they say? If I want to know the water that I'm taking is safe, what can I do? Is there some home kind of way of knowing so that most of the literature comes out better with people who are very conversant? Come to the one of the one that has just been mentioned about the agrophone and what have you. We've heard about West Africa. When we come to Kenya, now this is our home ground, what should we be watching out for? Where do you think we might be,